When a homeless man asked Clint Eastwood for spare change on a San Francisco sidewalk, everyone expected the Hollywood legend to simply walk away like all the others. Instead, what happened next left the entire crowd completely speechless. Clint didn't just give him money. He sat down right there on the cold pavement beside him and did something that nobody could have predicted. But that was only the beginning. What Clint did the next day would change this man's life forever and spark a movement that would reach millions around the world. This is the true story of how one simple act of kindness created a ripple effect that nobody saw coming. It was a quiet evening in downtown San Francisco. The streets hummed with the usual rhythm of traffic, honking horns and people rushing past without a second glance at their surroundings. Among them walked Clint Eastwood, dressed in his signature style, a worn leather jacket, aviator sunglasses, and weathered boots, moving through the crowd like a ghost from another era. He had just finished a late lunch at a small Italian bistro tucked away on a side street. Nothing elaborate, just a peaceful spot where he could enjoy a meal without the constant attention that fame brings. But as he stepped outside, heading toward his vintage truck parked near the corner, a soft voice caught his attention. "Excuse me. Sir. Could you spare some change for a meal?" The voice belonged to a man sitting against the brick wall beside the restaurant entrance. His clothes were tattered, his beard unkempt, and his eyes carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. He held a piece of cardboard with the words, "Hungry. Anything helps," written in faded marker. Clint stopped. Most people would have kept walking, pretending they hadn't heard. But that wasn't his way. He turned slowly, his weathered eyes meeting the man's gaze. For a brief moment, the busy street seemed to fade into silence. The man didn't recognize who he was speaking to. A young couple nearby whispered to each other. "Is that Clint Eastwood?" The others shook their head. No way. He wouldn't stop for someone like that. But he did. Clint walked closer, his footsteps deliberate and steady. The man looked nervous, almost regretting his question. "I just need a little help," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "Whatever you can spare." Instead of reaching for his wallet, Clint lowered himself down to sit on the cold pavement beside him. The simple gesture drew curious stares from everyone passing by. "What's your name?" "Friend?" Clint asked, his voice gravelly but kind. The man blinked in surprise. "Marcus," he answered softly. Clint nodded slowly, studying his face with the same intensity he once brought to his craft. Then, after a moment of silence, he said something that made everyone within earshot pause what they were doing. "Marcus, maybe you don't just need money today. Maybe you need someone to remember you're still here." But what Clint did next left everyone speechless. For a long moment, the street went quiet. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade into the background. Clint Eastwood, a man known around the world for his strength and presence, now sat on the sidewalk beside a homeless man named Marcus. No cameras, no fanfare. Just two people sharing a moment most would never notice. Clint leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "Marcus, how long have you been out here?" he asked gently. Marcus stared at the cracked concrete. "Too long," he muttered. "Nearly 4 years now." "4 years," Clint repeated quietly, letting the weight of those words settle. "How does someone end up living on the streets?" Marcus gave a bitter laugh, the kind that comes from pain rather than humor. "One mistake after another. I guess, lost my job as a carpenter after I got injured on site. Couldn't afford my rent. Then everything just collapsed." He hesitated, glancing at Clint as if expecting judgment. But Clint simply nodded, listening intently. Did you try getting back into work? Clint asked. I tried, Marcus said. But when you look like this, he gestured to his torn clothes and dirty hands. Nobody wants to give you a chance. They see the outside and make up their mind before you can even speak. Clint sighed quietly. People forget that life can change for anyone at any time. By now, a small crowd had formed. Some had their phones out, pretending to scroll but secretly recording. Others whispered among themselves, "I've seen celebrities walk right past homeless people." One woman said softly, "But this is different. This is real." Clint turned slightly, his weathered voice steady and calm. "You know something." "Marcus," he said, "people think strength is about being tough or never backing down. But real strength is when you keep your spirit alive, even when the world tries to break it." Marcus smiled faintly, a small light returning to his tired eyes. "Hard to keep that spirit when nobody sees you anymore," he said. Clint nodded slowly. "Then maybe today, somebody finally does." He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of pulling out cash, he set his phone down on the ground beside him. "Money can help you for a day," Clint said. "But I want to know what would help you for longer than that." Marcus's voice trembled. "I just want to feel human again, to have a place to sleep, a job, something that reminds me I still matter." Clint sat quietly for a few seconds, then stood up. "Stay right here." "Marcus," he said. Marcus looked worried. "I didn't mean to bother you." "Esser, I'm sorry." Clint raised a hand gently. "You didn't bother me. Just stay here." He walked back into the bistro. The crowd exchanged confused looks, some assuming he had simply left. "Told you," someone muttered. "They always walk away in the end." But within minutes, Clint came back out, not with loose change, but with 2 large paper bags filled with food, sandwiches, fruit, and bottled water. He sat back down beside Marcus, opened one bag, and handed it to him. "Eat with me," he said simply. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "With you?" Clint smiled slightly. "You asked for help. I figured we could start with a meal." The crowd went silent again. Some people lowered their phones, realizing this wasn't just a celebrity moment. This was genuine humanity. Marcus hesitated at first, then slowly opened the bag and began to eat. His hands shook, but the relief on his face spoke louder than any words could. Clint sat beside him, eating calmly, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. A small girl walking with her father tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, why is that man eating with the homeless person?" Her father smiled gently. "That's called compassion, sweetheart." Clint looked at Marcus and said quietly, "You know, people measure success by money, fame, or possessions. But the truth is, none of that means anything if you forget how to care about others." Marcus swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Clint nodded. "They do. Sometimes they just need to be reminded how." A man in the crowd called out, "Hey, Eastwood, that's a real stand-up thing you're doing." Clint just smiled faintly. "No heroes here," he replied. "Just 2 people sharing a meal." The moment touched everyone watching. You could feel something shift in the air, a quiet understanding that compassion still existed in the world. The 2 men sat side by side on that cool San Francisco sidewalk, the smell of fresh bread and coffee lingering in the air. People walked past, pretending not to stare, but almost everyone slowed down just to witness what was happening. Clint Eastwood, a man known for his commanding presence and quiet authority, was sharing a simple lunch with a man the world had forgotten. No spotlight. No cameras. Just humanity in its purest form. Marcus took another bite of his sandwich, eating slowly, as if savoring not just the food, but the moment itself. Between bites, he whispered, "You don't have to do this. You know, I'm used to people walking away." Clint leaned back slightly, his voice calm and steady. "Maybe that's the problem, Marcus. Too many people walk away." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city noise returned. The sound of engines, footsteps, laughter from across the street. But in that small space on the sidewalk, it felt like a different world entirely. Finally, Marcus looked up. "I used to have a life," he said softly. "A wife. 2 sons. They'd be teenagers now." Clint turned his head slightly. "What happened?" Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "After I got hurt, I couldn't work anymore. I was a finish carpenter, one of the best in the city. But once the medical bills started piling up and I couldn't bring home money, my wife couldn't take it anymore. She left, took the boys with her. I tried to rebuild, to start over, but every door slammed shut. Eventually, I just stopped knocking." Clint listened quietly, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. "Life can be brutal," he said, "but it only defeats you if you stop fighting back." Marcus gave a weak laugh. "You sound like someone who's never fallen down." Clint smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised, friend. Everyone falls. The difference is, some people get back up." The sincerity in his tone hit Marcus harder than any motivational speech ever could. He nodded slowly, his eyes watering. "I used to believe that," he whispered. "Now I just exist day to day." Clint took a sip from his water bottle, then said, "Existing isn't living. You've still got fight left in you. I can see it in your eyes." Marcus shook his head. "You don't even know me." Clint leaned closer. "I don't have to know your whole story. I can see it in your eyes. You're exhausted, but you're not broken. That means you're still standing. And that's half the battle right there." The words hung in the air like a promise. The small crowd that had gathered wasn't whispering or recording anymore. They were listening, truly listening. The moment felt sacred. Marcus rubbed his eyes with his sleeve. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." Clint smiled softly. "Maybe I don't. But if we only helped people we owed something to, the world would be a pretty cold place. Don't you think?" Marcus chuckled through his tears. "You really do sound like one of those characters from your old westerns." Clint laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Maybe I learned a thing or two from them, but the truth is simple, Marcus. Kindness doesn't cost anything. And it's the only thing that multiplies every time you give it away." Marcus looked down at the ground, his voice trembling. "You know, nobody's called me by my name in months. Everyone just says, 'Hey, you,' or ignores me completely." Clint's expression softened even more. "Names matter," he said. "They remind us we're human, that we exist as individuals, not just problems to ignore." The conversation continued for several more minutes, shifting between comfortable silence and genuine connection. The wind picked up, tugging at Clint's jacket. But he didn't move. He stayed right there beside Marcus as if nothing else in the world mattered. Finally, Clint reached into his jacket pocket. "Tell you what," he said. "Tomorrow morning, I want you to meet me right here. Same spot, 9 o'clock. Marcus frowned. "Why? You've already done more than enough." Clint smiled. "Let's just say I have something in mind. Something that might help you get your life back on track. The words hit Marcus like lightning. Hope. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Flickered inside him like a candle in the dark. "You're serious?" he asked. His voice barely a whisper. "Dead serious," Clint replied, offering his hand. "Tomorrow at 9. Don't be late." Marcus slowly reached out, shaking his hand. His grip was weak, but full of gratitude and disbelief. "I'll be here," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Clint nodded once, then stood up and began walking toward his truck. People watched silently, the way you do when you realize you've just witnessed something rare and beautiful. Marcus looked down at the half-eaten sandwich in his hands, then up at the street where Clint disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in years, he smiled. Not because of the food or the promise of help, but because someone had finally seen him as a human being. That night, as he lay beneath the highway overpass with his worn blanket wrapped around him, Marcus whispered to himself, maybe tomorrow will be different. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would be different, because Clint Eastwood wasn't done changing his life. The next morning, the city woke to a crisp breeze, rolling in from the bay. People hurried through their routines, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold on a small, forgotten corner of the street. Marcus was already there, sitting on the same spot as yesterday. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying Clint's words over and over. Tomorrow at 9. Don't be late. He clutched the worn blanket around his shoulders, glancing down the street every few minutes, watching for any sign of the old truck. For years, people had made promises to him and broken them without a second thought. But something about this felt different. Still, a part of him couldn't shake the doubt. What if it was just pity? What if he doesn't show by 9:15? Marcus's hope began to waver. He looked at the people passing by, the same indifferent faces as always. His heart sank a little deeper. Just when he started to stand up to leave, he heard the unmistakable rumble of an engine. Deep, powerful, and unmistakable. A vintage pickup truck pulled up beside the curb. The door opened and out stepped Clint Eastwood, wearing a dark jacket and his signature aviators. Heads turned immediately. Passers-by slowed down, whispering in disbelief and pulling out their phones. Marcus froze. "You came," he whispered, his voice filled with amazement. Clint smiled warmly. "Told you I would." "Didn't I?" Marcus grinned, a rare, genuine smile that reached his tired eyes. "Yeah, I just didn't think you'd actually remember." Clint chuckled softly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." He reached into the back of the truck and pulled out a medium-sized backpack. "Come on," he said. "Walk with me." Marcus hesitated. "Where are we going?" Clint turned slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Just trust me." They started walking down the street together, one man in tattered clothes, the other in a worn leather jacket. The contrast was striking, yet there was no judgment in Clint's eyes, only quiet determination. As they walked, people began recognizing him. Some whispered, "That's Clint Eastwood," while others discreetly recorded on their phones. Marcus kept his head low, feeling self-conscious. "They're all staring at us," he muttered. "Let them," Clint said without breaking stride. "Maybe they'll learn something today." A few blocks later, they arrived at a small barber shop tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore. The place looked modest but clean, with an old-fashioned red and white pole spinning outside. Clint pushed open the door. "After you." he said. Inside, the air smelled of shaving cream, aftershave, and fresh towels. The barber, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up in surprise. Mr. Eastwood, he said with a genuine smile. What brings you in today? Clint nodded toward Marcus. My friend here could use your help. Roberto. Roberto smiled warmly at Marcus. Of course. Please. Have a seat. Marcus sat hesitantly in the worn leather chair. For the first time in years, someone draped a clean cape over his shoulders with respect and care. Clint leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching quietly as Roberto got to work. The electric clippers buzzed softly. Clumps of tangled hair fell to the tiled floor. Bit by bit, Marcus's worn, weathered face began to re-emerge. Cleaner, sharper, more alive. When Roberto was finished, he spun the chair around to face the large mirror on the wall. Marcus stared at his reflection, completely speechless. The man looking back wasn't the same one who had asked for spare change yesterday. He looked alive again, like someone who mattered. I don't recognize myself, Marcus murmured, touching his clean-shaven face. Clint smiled. Maybe that's the point. After paying Roberto generously and thanking him, Clint handed Marcus the backpack. There are clothes inside, he said simply. Bathrooms in the back. Go change. Marcus hesitated once again, overwhelmed by the kindness. You really didn't have to do all this for me. Clint looked him straight in the eyes. Yes, I did. Everyone deserves a fresh start, even if it begins with just a haircut and clean clothes. Minutes later, Marcus stepped out wearing a new pair of dark jeans, a clean button-down shirt, and a sturdy jacket. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a homeless man living on the streets. He looked like someone with dignity, someone with a story worth telling. When they walked back outside, the small crowd that had gathered began to clap. Someone even shouted, "He looks like a completely different person." Marcus's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. I don't deserve this, he said under his breath. Clint put a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. You deserve a chance, Marcus. That's all anyone needs. They walked back toward the truck, and Clint handed him the backpack again. There's something else inside for you, he said. Marcus unzipped it slowly, his hands trembling. Inside were essential items. Socks, shoes, toiletries, and a sealed envelope. He opened it carefully and froze. Inside was a stack of bills. Not just a few dollars, but enough to truly change his situation completely. His hands shook. Clint, this is way too much. I can't possibly accept this. Clint shook his head firmly. You're not taking charity. You're accepting help with one condition. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. What condition? Tomorrow morning, Clint said. You're going to walk into that employment center, 2 blocks from here, and ask for work. You're not going to give up on yourself again. Deal? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Deal, he whispered, his voice breaking. Clint nodded once, his expression steady and resolute. Good. Then my work here is done. Marcus tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Emotion overwhelmed him completely. He stepped forward and hugged Clint tightly, holding on like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. For someone who had lost everything, that simple act of genuine kindness meant more than gold. As Clint climbed into his truck and started the engine, Marcus stood on the curb, watching him drive away slowly. He held the backpack close to his chest, tears rolling down his freshly shaven face. But this time, they weren't tears of pain or despair. They were tears of hope. Real, tangible hope. The cameras had caught everything. Within hours, video clips began spreading online like wildfire. The legendary actor who stopped for a homeless man and gave him a second chance at life. And yet, Clint didn't post a single thing about it on social media. Not a word. Not a photo. Nothing. To him, it wasn't a performance or publicity stunt. It was simply the right thing to do. The human thing to do. But what happened the next day when Marcus walked into that employment center was something even Clint Eastwood couldn't have predicted. The sun rose brighter the following morning, painting the San Francisco skyline in shades of gold and amber. Marcus sat up from his makeshift bed under the highway overpass, clutching the backpack to his chest like a treasure. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible or worthless. He felt seen, acknowledged, valid. He pulled on his clean jacket, looked into a cracked piece of mirror propped against the concrete wall, and took a deep breath. Today's the day, he whispered to himself with newfound determination. 2 blocks away, just like Clint had said, was the city's employment assistance center, a place Marcus had walked past hundreds of times, but never dared to enter. Convinced nobody would hire someone like him. His palms were sweating, his stomach twisted with nerves. But Clint's words echoed powerfully in his mind. You're not taking charity. You're accepting help by not giving up on yourself. So Marcus stepped forward, pushed open the glass door, and walked inside. When he entered, the receptionist looked up with a polite smile. Good morning. How can I help you today? For a moment, Marcus froze, unused to being addressed with kindness and respect. I'm looking for work, he said, his voice steadier than he expected. Do you have any trade experience? She asked warmly. He nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I used to be a finish carpenter. Worked on custom homes and commercial buildings for 15 years. Her eyes lit up with genuine interest. You're in luck. A local construction company just posted an opening this morning. They're looking for experienced carpenters. She handed him a form and a pen. Fill this out and I'll schedule you for an interview today if possible. Marcus's hands trembled as he wrote, his handwriting shaky but determined. Every letter felt like a small victory, a step back toward the life he once had. When he handed the paper back, the receptionist smiled encouragingly. Your interview is at 1 o'clock this afternoon. The address is on this card. You've got this. He stepped outside into the bright morning sunlight, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. I've got this, he repeated softly, trying to believe it. As he waited for the hours to pass, Marcus walked around the city with new eyes. The world looked different now. Brighter, more alive, more full of possibility. He passed the same spots where he used to beg for money, the same people who once ignored him completely. But now, something fundamental had changed. He had changed, from the inside out. When 1 o'clock came, Marcus walked into the construction company office, shoulders back and head held high. The place smelled of sawdust, fresh lumber, and possibility. The owner, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, greeted him with a firm handshake. You must be Marcus, she said. Come on back. Let's talk. For half an hour, Marcus told her about his past work, the detailed trim he'd installed, the custom cabinets he'd built, the long nights, and the pride he once felt in his craft. Sarah listened carefully, asking technical questions that Marcus answered with growing confidence. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. You clearly know your trade. That's obvious. You can start Monday morning if you're serious about this. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. You mean it? You're really giving me a chance? Sarah smiled knowingly. Everyone deserves a second chance. Marcus. Don't waste it. Marcus shook her hand firmly, his grip stronger now. I won't. Ma'am, I promise you I won't. As he walked out of the office, the afternoon sun hit his face like a blessing. He closed his eyes and whispered with deep gratitude. Thank you. Clint, thank you. But what Marcus didn't know was that Clint was already watching from a distance. Across the street, Clint sat quietly in his truck, observing everything through the windshield. He saw the way Marcus walked out of that building. Confident, purposeful, transformed. Clint smiled to himself, a quiet satisfaction spreading through him. He did it, he murmured softly. The kid really did it. He could have driven away then, satisfied that his part was done. But as he started the engine, a small group of people approached his truck, having recognized him from yesterday's viral video. Hey, you're the guy who helped that homeless man, right? One of them said, holding up a phone excitedly. Clint sighed softly, rolling down his window. I'm just someone who stopped to listen, he replied humbly. A young woman recording with her phone lowered it respectfully. You don't understand what you started. People everywhere are talking about it. There's a hashtag trending called Pay It Forward Challenge. You've inspired something incredible. Clint's eyebrows raised slightly. A hashtag? She nodded eagerly. Yeah. People all over the country are buying meals for the homeless, donating clothes, helping strangers, volunteering at shelters. All because of what you did yesterday. You've started a movement. Clint looked out the windshield for a long moment, processing this information. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. Then maybe the world isn't as far gone as everyone thinks. By that evening, news outlets had picked up the story. Video clips of Clint sitting beside Marcus, handing over the backpack, and walking with him down the street played across screens nationwide with headlines like Hollywood legend helps, homeless man rebuild his life, and Clint Eastwood sparks national kindness movement. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to the overpass. Not to sleep there, but to say goodbye to the place that had been his home for far too long. He gathered his few remaining belongings into the backpack, took one last look at the cold concrete and graffiti-covered walls, and whispered, "This chapter is over. A new one begins now." That night, he checked into a small budget motel using some of the money Clint had given him. For the first time in years, he lay in a real bed with clean sheets beneath him and a solid roof over his head. He stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed with emotion, and smiled through his tears. On the small nightstand was the envelope from Clint. Inside, along with the money, was a handwritten note on simple paper. This isn't charity. It's a reminder that one act of courage can change everything. Keep fighting. C.E. Marcus read it again and again, his chest tight with gratitude and determination. Then he pulled out an old notebook he'd kept hidden for years, and on the first page, in shaky but hopeful handwriting, he wrote 5 simple words. Tomorrow I start my life. He didn't know that by morning. His face and his story would be everywhere, shared millions of times across the internet. The viral video had reached people in every corner of the country. Comments poured in by the thousands. Faith in humanity restored. This is what real kindness looks like. We need more people like Clint Eastwood. Some viewers even began searching for Marcus online, wanting to help him reconnect with his estranged family. For the first time in nearly a decade, Marcus's name wasn't just another forgotten face on the street. It was a symbol of hope and redemption. And somewhere in the city, Clint Eastwood smiled quietly to himself, knowing that sometimes the smallest spark of compassion can light up even the darkest night. By the following morning, San Francisco was buzzing with activity and conversation. Phones vibrated constantly with notifications. Social media timelines filled with one dominant story. Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood helps homeless man rebuild his life from nothing. Clips of Clint sitting on the sidewalk, handing over the backpack, and walking beside Marcus were shared everywhere, on every platform imaginable. People were calling it the ripple of compassion. In one widely shared news clip, a reporter's voice said solemnly, "In a world where fame often creates distance from reality, one man chose humility over headlines. And now his simple act of kindness is inspiring millions around the globe." Marcus woke up in his motel room, rubbing his eyes and stretching. He had no idea how famous he'd become overnight. When he opened his old cracked phone to check the time, it was buzzing non-stop with messages from unknown numbers, social media notifications, and friend requests. He scrolled through the endless stream of activity, confusion washing over him like a wave. Then he saw his own face, freshly shaved and wearing his new jacket, appearing on post after post with captions like, "Meet Marcus," living proof that one good deed can change everything. He froze in disbelief. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself. Moments later, there was a firm knock at his motel room door. It was the front desk clerk, Marcus. "There are some people downstairs asking for you." Marcus frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. "Who would be asking for me?" The clerk smiled mysteriously. "You'll want to see for yourself. Trust me." He walked down the narrow staircase, his heart pounding with each step. When he reached the small lobby, he stopped dead in his tracks, unable to believe what he was seeing. Two young men stood there, eyes wide, hands trembling with emotion. "Dad," one of them whispered, his voice breaking. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. His mind went completely blank. That voice. It couldn't be. His eyes filled with tears as he took a hesitant step closer. "Jacob?" he said, his voice cracking. The young man nodded, tears streaming down his face, and standing beside him was his brother. Both of them, grown up, nearly unrecognizable, but unmistakably his sons. "We saw you on the internet," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't believe it was really you. We thought you were gone forever." Marcus covered his mouth, completely overwhelmed. Years of pain, regret, and loneliness melted away in an instant. "You found me?" he whispered. "We had to," the younger son said. His name was Daniel. "Mom showed us the video. We couldn't stop crying. You looked happy again. Dad, you looked alive." Marcus held them both tightly, his whole body shaking with sobs of joy and relief. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, over and over. "For everything. For disappearing. For not being there when you needed me." Jacob pulled back just enough to look into his father's eyes. "You don't have to apologize anymore. Dad, you're here now. That's what matters most." They stood there in the small motel lobby, crying, laughing, holding on to each other as if time itself had stopped. Other people in the lobby began clapping softly, many wiping their own tears. After a few moments, Daniel said, "Clint Eastwood changed your life. Dad, do you think we could meet him, thank him in person for giving us our father back?" Marcus smiled through his tears, nodding. I think he'd appreciate that. Later that day, Clint sat in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from the chaos of the viral attention storm. He sipped his black coffee, half watching news anchors on the television debate. His intentions, some called it a publicity stunt. Others called it pure human compassion. He didn't care either way. He hadn't done it for cameras or recognition. He'd done it for Marcus. Plain and simple. Just then, the cafe door opened and a familiar voice said, "Mr. Eastwood?" Clint looked up from his coffee. Marcus stood there, clean, confident, smiling genuinely, with two young men beside him. "Well," Clint said, standing up with a warm grin, "you clean up pretty damn good, my friend." Marcus chuckled. "I had good reasons to." He gestured toward his sons. "These are my boys, Jacob and Daniel. They found me because of what you did." Clint's weathered eyes softened with emotion. "That's the best news I've heard all week." Jacob stepped forward, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood. You didn't just change his life. You gave us our father back. We'll never forget what you did." Clint smiled gently, shaking both their hands. "You don't need to thank me. Boys, your father did the hard part. He chose to start fighting again." Marcus nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe so. But I wouldn't have had the courage without you believing in me first." Clint placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The courage was always there, inside you, Marcus. I just helped you remember it was still there." For a moment, the four of them stood in comfortable silence, a living testament to how one small act of kindness could change the entire course of multiple lives. As they sat down together to talk and share stories, people around the cafe started recognizing them. Phones came out, cameras flashed, whispers spread through the room. But this time, Clint didn't shy away or hide. He turned toward one of the nearby cameras being held up and said calmly and clearly, "If you're watching this right now, remember something important. Kindness doesn't need an audience or applause. It just needs a willing heart. The world doesn't change with grand speeches or empty promises. It changes with small actions. One person helping another, one moment at a time." His words spread across the internet once again, igniting another powerful wave of emotion and action. That evening, as the sun dipped below the San Francisco skyline, Clint, Marcus, Jacob, and Daniel walked outside together into the cool evening air. The city lights flickered and glowed around them like stars. Marcus turned to Clint and said softly, "You know, when I asked you for spare change that day, I honestly thought you'd just walk away like everyone else." Clint smiled faintly, looking out at the city. "And if I had walked away, I never would have met a good man or helped bring a family back together." Daniel slipped his arm around his father's shoulders. "You changed more than one life. Mr. Eastwood, you changed all of ours." Clint looked up at the darkening sky, his voice calm and grounded in wisdom. "No," he said thoughtfully. "Your father changed his own life. I just reminded him that he could." As they said their goodbyes and parted ways, Marcus felt something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real. Lasting peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're finally home. Clint watched them walk away together, father and sons reunited, and a faint smile crossed his face. He didn't need applause, praise, or headlines. The true reward was right there in front of him. A man reborn, a family reunited, a message spreading hope across the entire world. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade from public consciousness. What started as a quiet moment on a lonely San Francisco street had transformed into a movement that stretched across cities, states, and even countries. The hashtag Pay It Forward challenge had reached over 100 million views worldwide. People everywhere were sharing their own stories of kindness, buying meals for strangers, helping elderly neighbors, donating to homeless shelters, reconnecting with estranged family members they hadn't spoken to in years, volunteering their time. And at the center of it all was Marcus, no longer the broken man who slept beneath a highway overpass. He now worked full-time at Sarah's construction company, showing up early every single morning with a smile on his face, grateful for the opportunity. His hands were once again covered in sawdust and wood stain, but this time they symbolized dignity and purpose, not despair. His co-workers respected him, customers praised his craftsmanship, and every night before leaving, he would look in the small mirror by the door and whisper with deep gratitude, "Thank you, Clint. Thank you for seeing me." But the story didn't end there. One morning, as Marcus arrived at the construction site, a news van was parked outside waiting. The reporter stepped out with a friendly, professional smile. "Marcus, do you have a moment? We'd like to do a follow-up story." Marcus laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. "I thought my 15 minutes of fame were over by now." "Not quite yet," the reporter said warmly. "The world wants to know how you're doing and what message you have for everyone who saw your story and was touched by it." Marcus hesitated briefly, then smiled. "Sure," he said softly. "Let's do it." A few minutes later, the cameras were rolling and the lights were on. The interviewer asked, "Marcus, millions of people around the world were moved by Clint Eastwood's kindness toward you. How has your life changed since that incredible day?" Marcus looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything changed," he said honestly, "but not because of money or fame or social media attention. It changed because someone believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." He looked straight into the camera with intensity and conviction. "If you're watching this right now and you've given up on yourself, please don't. One act of kindness, one small moment of courage, one person who sees you, it can turn your entire story around. I'm living proof of that." The reporter smiled, visibly moved. "That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing." That clip went viral again within hours. But this time it wasn't about Clint. It was about hope, resilience, and the power of second chances. Meanwhile, Clint watched the interview from his home, sitting in his favorite chair with a cup of coffee. He smiled faintly as Marcus's words filled the screen. He found his voice. Clint murmured to himself. That's all he ever really needed. A few days later, Clint was invited to speak at a major charity event focused on homelessness awareness and solutions. The organizers specifically asked him to share his story, the story that had started this entire movement. Standing on stage under soft spotlights, Clint looked out at the audience of hundreds. Cameras flashed from every direction. Journalists waited with their pens poised. But his voice remained calm, grounded, authentic. "We live in a world that teaches us to look away," he began, his words measured and powerful. "To walk past the broken, the forgotten, the invisible people on our streets. But the truth is, none of us are truly invisible. Every life you touch, every hand you hold, every heart you remind to keep beating. That's how we actually make this world better. One person at a time." The audience fell completely silent, His words hung heavy in the air, resonating deeply. Marcus didn't need a hero that day. Clint continued. He just needed a reminder that he mattered, that he was still valuable, still human. That's what real kindness does. It tells someone, you matter. And that's something every single one of us can give freely. When he finished speaking, the entire audience rose to their feet in unison. The applause was long, genuine, and filled with profound emotion. But Clint didn't smile for the cameras or wave dramatically. He simply nodded humbly, grateful, at peace with what he'd done. That night, when the event ended, Clint stepped outside into the cool evening air. A young boy approached him with his mother, holding a small handwritten note. "Mr. Eastwood," the boy said shyly, "I helped a homeless person today. I gave him my lunch because you did it first." Clint knelt down to the boy's level, smiling warmly. "Then you've already made the world better. Kid, keep doing that." The boy grinned from ear to ear. "Will you keep helping people too?" Clint chuckled softly, ruffling the kid's hair. "That's the plan. Son, that's always the plan." As the boy ran back to his mother, Clint looked up at the night sky. The city lights shimmered like distant stars, and he whispered to himself, "One act. That's all it takes to change everything." And somewhere across the city, Marcus was sitting at a small dinner table in his new apartment with his two sons, laughing and talking about their lives. The sound of 3 lives healed and restored by a single moment of genuine compassion echoing into the future.